relations between Israel and the United States have been less than perfect in the last few years, especially since the U.S. signed a historic framework agreement with Israel's biggest enemy, Iran. For the first time since the deal was signed, U.S. President Barack Obama hosted Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu last week for a meeting in the White House. Netanyahu further pressed his complicated relationship with Obama when he flew to Washington in March at a Republican leadership's invitation in a bid to convince Congress to vote nay on the impending Iran agreement, one he said could lead to the end of the State of Israel and would be a threat to the whole world. Moving past the tensions surrounding the nuclear deal with Iran, the leaders discussed crafting a new U.S. military aid package for Israel, the surge of violent terror attacks in Israel, and general unrest in the Middle East. As Israel's most important ally, any further fray of ties between Washington and Jerusalem could be detrimental to Israel's sensitive security situation. Our focus this week is on Washington, D.C. Hello and welcome to our weekly focus. I'm Tal Heinrich. U.S. President Barack Obama and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu haven't met face-to-face in more than a year. In the past 4 months, they haven't even spoken on the phone. Now, last week in Washington, D.C., this disconnection came to an end. And what about the results of this meeting? Let's go straight to the Jerusalem Post White House correspondent Michael Wilner and find out. Hello, Michael. Thank you for being with us.
Happy to be here.
So how would you describe the American media's coverage of Netanyahu's visit and his meeting with Obama?
There seems to be a lot less coverage than in past Netanyahu visits, and I think that's because there's less excitement, if you will. There's less tension, if you will. Obviously, the last time Netanyahu was here, he did not get an invitation to the White House or to meet with any Obama administration officials. He had that speech to Congress, which was quite a moment in the U.S.-Israel relationship. There's nothing equivalent to that in this visit. Although he did have some interesting moments yesterday with a liberal think tank, the Center for American Progress. Even that, however, didn't get the same coverage. So it's a subdued visit, all things considered.
Did any remarkable moments took place behind the scenes, maybe?
The truth of the matter is that, you know, if the Israeli government is successful in increasing the next decade-long budget to $5 billion a year from $3 billion a year, that's a significant moment in the U.S.-Israel relationship, and that dominated a 2-hour and 45-minute meeting in the Oval Office with the president, with their national security advisors, with their ambassadors to each nation, with their secretaries of state and so forth. So it's not a particularly sexy development, but that's the sort of progress in the relationship that both sides can actually agree on and would like to see. So I think that's the highlight.
Jerusalem Post Michael Wilner, thank you so much for this.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
The people who run the United States happen to live in one of the most racially segregated big cities in the country. The vast majority on the east side of D.C. are overwhelmingly black, while the vast majority of western areas are overwhelmingly white. Now, Valerie Wilson, she's an economist at the Economic Policy Institute, and she will give us the bigger picture behind that. Valerie, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Tal. My pleasure.
So tell us, what are the main causes which led to this segregation in D.C.?
Well, segregation in Washington, D.C. isn't that different from segregation in any other major American city. The fact that our cities are so segregated by race, we can trace directly to federal policies. For example, in the 1930s through the 1950s, the Fair Housing Administration had a policy where they would guarantee bank loans for developers to develop neighborhoods that would explicitly prohibit those houses being sold to African Americans. Currently, we don't have those same sorts of explicitly racial policies on the books, but the two policies we have in place that are focused on low and moderate income housing, being Section 8 and the low income housing tax credits, communities and individuals, landlords can freely decide to not accept beneficiaries of those programs without any ramifications from the federal government.
And Valerie, we tend to refer to segregation nowadays as something very negative, but maybe not everything about it is so negative. Does segregation necessarily mean racism?
Well, I think that question was really answered in the 1960s in Brown v. Board of Education. There is no such thing as separate but equal. The whole reason behind segregating communities and segregating people by race is to draw lines in terms of who will have access to various economic resources. So the fact that people live among others who are predominantly, like them in terms of race, in and of itself isn't a problem, but the fact that we chose to segregate people by race and then use that segregation to define who would have opportunities to build wealth, who would have opportunities to get a quality education, that's really the problem with segregation.
So is there a certain attempt to force a change on this segregation, or do you think that forcing it from above isn't the right way to go about it?
Well, I think that any intentional plans to integrate communities is simply reversing the effects of policies that were explicitly racial and segregated communities by race. I think that the research on the subject is clear. We know that in segregated communities, especially communities that are segregated by race, they also tend to be segregated by economics as well. So, there's a high level of concentrated poverty. In research by Raj Chetty, most popularly, and others, really demonstrates the fact that has negative impact in terms of economic opportunity and mobility. So I think, the point of desegregating neighborhoods is simply a reversal of policies that intentionally put segregation in place to begin with. And it's clear that it's a positive thing to actively seek desegregation, and hence the HUD's decision on their affirmatively furthering fair housing rule.
Valerie Wilson, thank you so much for all this interesting information and all your insights.
Thank you.
And now let's see what else is going on in Washington, D.C.
The Smithsonian's National Museum of American History in Washington hosted cast and crew of the TV drama Breaking Bad on taking into custody more than 10 of its props to recognize the show's influence on American culture. Actor Bryan Cranston and Aaron Paul were among the show's cast members present at the event, as iconic props and costumes from the series were donated to the museum. Mourners gathered at the gate of the French embassy in Washington over the weekend, where they dropped off flowers, candles, and even bottles of French wine in tribute to the victims of the Paris attacks. Both the French flag and the European Union flag were lowered to half-mast at the French embassy in Washington. Young people took to the streets in Washington, D.C. last week, demanding racial, climate, and immigration justice. The protests took place exactly 1 year before the 2016 presidential election. Participants included college students and young adults from across the country. The protests ended in front of the White House, where protesters gathered for more than 2 hours. U.S. President Barack Obama landed in Turkey for the annual G20 summit. Air Force One landed at the airport of Antalya, bristling with 12,000 police and multiple security checkpoints to ensure security for the world leaders, who officially kick off a 2-day meeting Sunday. After the G20, the U.S. leader will head to Manila and Kuala Lumpur to attend Asia-Pacific economic and political summits.
The DC Opportunity Scholarship Program provides scholarships to low-income children in Washington, D.C. for tuition and other fees at participating private schools. The voucher bill was first approved in 2003 and allowed to expire in 2009. That was when President Obama's annual budget proposal cut all funding for the program. So what is the current status of it? The person with the answer is Jason Russell, a commentary writer for the Washington Examiner. Hi, thank you for being with us.
Hey, thank you for having me on.
So, Jason, we understand that last week the U.S. House passed a measure to reauthorize the D.C. voucher program. Why is this viewed as a personal victory for former House Speaker John Boehner?
His House colleagues about 1 month's notice that he was going to retire. So in that last month, he decided that this school choice program was a big priority for him. He personally authored a bill to extend the program by 5 years, and he doesn't often author bills. So he has only authored 1 or 2 bills in the past couple of years, so it was a big priority for him, and he made sure that it got passed.
So who are the politicians who are actually opposing this bill, and what is their case for it?
So it's interesting because the bill essentially gives free federal funds to the local D.C. government to run the program, and it also gives funds to their local charter schools and their regular public schools. But the D.C. City Council still opposes the program, even though it's free federal funds. My best guess is that it's because they receive a lot of funding from teachers' unions, and these charter schools and private schools are not often unionized. So they take that teachers' union funding and don't support the program.
And Jason, this was the first federally funded school voucher program in the United States. If the results of it are so satisfying, why not implementing it in other states?
In many states, there's about 16 states that have their own personalized school voucher program. If you, for example, take Louisiana, if you are a student there who's in a low-performing public school and your family income is below a certain level, you can apply for a voucher program there. The real exciting program is in Nevada, where they are, instead of a voucher program, they take it a step further and they essentially just give federal funds, or sorry, not federal funds, but state funds, and put it in a personalized account for parents to use on whatever educational needs they might have, whether it's tutoring or private school tuition or anything else. And
you know, in Sweden, for example, since the 90s, they have one of the most vouchered school programs in the world. And in your opinion, could maybe a broader version of this voucher program, starting maybe with elementary school, be a fair and a way not only for improving the entire level of education, but also to preserve the competition between the schools?
Absolutely. Everywhere we've seen a school voucher program, we have seen public schools improve along with these students using the program in private school.
Interesting guess. Thank you so much for this, Jason Russell. The Midnight Garden. It's the title of an extremely unique art installation. It is designed to resemble wallpaper that was created by using preserved insects from a variety of species. If you want to take a close look, you will have to visit the Renwick Gallery, which reopened in DC this week and is home to the Smithsonian American Art Museum. And if you want to see the artist behind this exhibition, here she is, joining us now from DC, Jennifer Angus. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Hi.
So
nice
Jennifer,
to be here.
Jennifer, how did you come up with this idea of using bugs for art?
Well, I study textiles at university, and in fact, I teach textile design at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And I was doing research in northern Thailand on tribal minority dress, so the area known as the Golden Triangle. And within that region, there are many different ethnic minority groups. And I came upon a garment, it's a shawl actually, that had a fringe upon which they had strung green metallic beetle wings. And I had that moment of revelation. I had never thought of insects as being beautiful before, beyond butterflies. I don't know, maybe I was sick the day my class went to a natural history museum. So I became fascinated with the insects, in part because of their beauty, and in this circumstance because of the ingenuity, instead of using beads or sequins.
So what kind of bugs do you use, and how do you actually collect them?
Well, the insects come from specimen dealers. You know, sadly, I'm not out there with a net collecting them myself, but that would be a whole nother job. And a lot of people don't realize that there are insect specimen dealers, but there are. Many people collect insects. And the types of insects I use are beetles. They're very hardy. They stand up well to the wear and tear. And I think one thing people have to understand is that there are about 5,000 insects in this exhibition that have been collected over a period of about 20 years. And so they're reused from exhibition to exhibition. So I need something that's going to stand up to, you know, the installation and the takedown. So there are beetles, there are cicadas. Most things with wings in my work are either cicadas or grasshoppers. And then there are the very exotic leaf mimic varieties, so the ones that look like actual leaves of a particular tree. So that's kind of the standard repertoire of insects.
And Jennifer, what kind of reactions do you usually get from people who first encounter your, unique concept of using insects?
I think it would be fair to say that there is the wow moment where people walk in and I frequently hear, I've never seen anything like this before. And that's a very appropriate reaction given that this exhibition at the Renwick Gallery is called Wonder. People do experience that wonder, and it's kind of overwhelming to walk into this space which has a bright pink color and to be surrounded in 4 walls with insects.
Jennifer, Angus, thank you so much for this interview, and we wish you good luck in the entire Renwick Gallery for the reopening. Congratulations, and this was one very special and colorful interview.
Okay, it was my pleasure.
And thank you all for focusing on Washington, D.C. with us. Be sure to catch us again. And remember, all bugs are beautiful, not only butterflies.